All right, good afternoon, everybody. It is 1 o'clock, and thanks for joining us for our very last Confab of 2021. Hard to believe that we've made it through. I do want to, let's see here if I can get the right screen up. Everybody see that well? Okay. Before we begin our confab, we always like to do our land acknowledgement. So with that, and I'm going to make myself hopefully smaller, out of the way. Yes, so because we're here in Colorado, we'd like to acknowledge that the land currently known as Colorado has been traditional homelands of indigenous peoples since time immemorial. We are grateful to the work and partnership with the 48 sovereign nations who continue to call this land home. Together, we plan exhibits, collect, preserve, and interpret artifacts, do archaeological work, and create educational programs to share the history of Colorado. And you can see me. I'd like to again, thank you for attending this confab. Again, this is the last one for 2021, but I would like to continue that in 2022. Some possible topics that I'd like to maybe try to explore are guidance for researchers on getting collections ready for deposit. That's been one that I've fielded a lot of questions on. Also, some folks that are maybe interested in maybe doing some sort of virtual exhibits with collections, and also telling about the archaeology in their area. So perhaps a ArcGIS story maps. It's a very good, useful tool that might be available to you. So that might be also an exploration next year. And I know a lot of you also work with avocational artifact collections, not necessarily from professionals that are donated to your institution. And it would be great to give some, I think, guidance on how to accept those and how to evaluate those. And hopefully maybe we can get some experts that have dealt with that before to give us a presentation. Also, some of you have small paleontological collections that maybe need some extra care, or you don't know exactly what to do with. That's also a potential topic. Collections research for students, how to get incentives to them, how to outreach to local colleges and universities to see if there are collections in your care that maybe needing some rehousing, but also some new research. How can we enhance that capability? And of course, doing more Native American collaboration with our collections. We kind of talked about that initially back in the COVID year of 2020, but it would be nice to revisit that. And of course, many of our repositories are dealing with still NAGPRA and culturally affiliated artifacts. How best to deal with those? Those are some topics that I think we will try to year, but if you have suggestions or ideas, or if you have a presentation that you would like to give to the group last year, a couple of you did that, and I do really appreciate that very much. So if any of you have an idea that our group you'd like to share with our repository group, please just let me know. So I think maybe before we begin, because I think we'll have probably enough time, do you think, to do introductions to everybody?
Absolutely.
And because I'd like to make this very informal in some way, if you wouldn't mind just getting on to the confab here for a moment and turning on your mic, and if you want to, turn on your camera as well, and sharing with us who you are and what you're affiliated with. That would be really fantastic. And I'm going to start with somebody I know, and that's Rachel. So you can pass the buck after me.
I can do that. Hey guys. Ooh, feedback. Let me see if I can fix that. There we go. I'm with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and I love attending these when I can and learning about museum practices. It's something that we're trying to integrate more work into our department with. So this is a great setting for that. And yeah, I'm an archaeologist and do works on all of the state parks, including with the person I'll pass it over to with Loretta over in Trinidad.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Loretta, I see your name. So if you're not being able to speak.
I hope I can speak now.
Oh,
Can
great.
you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know how to use all this modern technology. I'm Loretta Martin, and I'm the director of the Loudon Henritze Archaeology Museum at Trinidad Junior College, or Trinidad State, excuse me. And we just changed our name, so I'm in a time warp here. We have collections from the Army Corps of Engineers and local collections. I don't know anybody else to pass the mic to.
Okay. How about Karen? Karen Sear.
Hi, I'm Karen Sear. I work with Arapahoe County Open Spaces, and most particularly one of their properties, 17 Mile House Farm Park. We have and I work with everything, the volunteers, the collection, in education programs, public events. But we have a small archaeology collection that pertains just to 17 Mile House, which there several times we've done restorations, and we've had the archaeologist and we have those collections that they were able to find on the property. So.
Great. Well, thank you.
Oh, and I hand it to someone else. Bill Hatcher, I see.
Hi, Bill. If you'd like to say hi. I see somebody else with their camera on. Glenn, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Glenn Human. I'm with the Hinsdale County Museum in the very small town of Lake City, Colorado. And this is my first Confab meeting, so I'm here to really learn what it's all about.
Fantastic. Thanks, Glenn. Glad to see you. Always, you haven't had any avalanches up there.
We had too many 2 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a student. I'm just finishing up my undergrad in anthropology at CU Denver. And I just always find the confabs really interesting. I interned with Todd earlier this year, like in February to May. So
Exactly. Well, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
How about the other Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Sachs. I'm the museums manager for City of Greeley Museums. And we have an upcoming exhibit that is going to tie in Deerfield archaeology. So I think this would be a great opportunity. And I love these confabs also.
Thank you very much, Sarah. How about Megan from DMNS?
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan. I'm the registrar at the Devon Museum of Nature and Science.
Great, thanks, Megan. Okay, how about my my sister Nancy, all the way from Hawaii? I think you're frozen.
Huh?
There you're good.
Better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I am I'm an archaeologist. I was the deputy SHPO here in Hawaii for about 3 years, and I worked for DLNR as an archaeologist for like 23. I currently work in Parks and Rec, and I still do consulting archaeology.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. All right.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Let's see. Nick. Currently in the office right now, so I can't really check the video. Thanks, Nick. Good to see you. How about, let's see, Mete?
Hi, I'm Meta.
Meta.
I'm also here from the Hinsdale County Historical Society with my colleague Glenn. I'm calling in from Oklahoma, a public history professor here.
Oh, right. Great. Fantastic. All right. And Amanda, I think maybe some of you know her, but she's from our office.
Hi all, I'm Amanda. I currently work for History Colorado. I'm the office manager for the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. I'm also studying, getting my master's in museum anthropology. But yeah, I'm just here to hear a little bit more about archaeology in Colorado.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Brittany.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, I'm the curator for Douglas County Government. I manage the history repository here in Castle Rock. All of our artifacts pretty much come from sites here in Douglas County. We have over 170,000 artifacts here, and most of them are prehistoric lithic material.
Fantastic, great. But Janine.
Trying to turn my camera on. Can you at least hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm Janine. I'm the Archaeological Collections Coordinator for the Archaeological Repository at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And I also developed and recently launched a museum and cultural heritage studies certificate program for undergraduates here at the university. So I always have students that are looking for like internship or volunteer opportunities. So just want to throw that out there. If you ever have anything like that, please let me know.
Great. Thank you, Janine. Michelle Coons.
Hi, just thought I would pop in. I'm Michelle Coons, the Curator of Archaeology at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science.
Thanks for joining us, Michelle. And finally, Rebecca Simon.
Hi, I'm Becca. I am the Assistant State Archaeologist. Just staying in touch.
Yep, another of our colleagues. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over. We're going to be talking about this fantastic new study. It doesn't come in because I've got the. Oh, well.
That's okay. I've got full PowerPoint.
Perfect.
Okay.
So many of you do know our state archaeologist, Holly Norton. She's been the state archaeologist for 6 years.
6 years now. I know.
Wow.
It's flown by.
I know. It's crazy. But we're really happy. She's, just a great advocate for archaeology, and I'm really happy that she's done this study, and I think you'll find it very helpful for your local communities as well. So I'm going to turn this all completely over, and she's going to, whoops, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And let's see here. Get it up.
Thanks, Todd.
Okay. That for you.
Okay.
And we are going to adjust this.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Okay.
that's great.
I'll get out of your way.
Thanks.
There we go.
Awesome. All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks very much to Todd for inviting me to talk about this, and thanks to you all for being here today. I know this is one of those weird times sandwiched in between two holidays, and everyone's either exhausted or busy finishing up the final bits of things they need to get done for the end of the year. But I'm really excited about this report that we have finished for the last couple of years. We've done some of these. Do you know how to advance the screen? Here we go. Thank you. So typically sometimes, not always, this is a tag team effort with my associate, Matt Goebel from Clarion Associates, who actually helped to produce this report. He and Shirley Powell from Crow Canyon, and hopefully I give them tons of credit as we go through, because they are really the brains behind this and the powerhouses. I'm just doing the rounds, speaking about it. We did the land acknowledgements, so I'll go ahead and skip that for now as well. And I'll launch right into this. So the purpose of this project was really to kind of get a baseline idea of all of the different types of archaeological activities we have in the state and what their various impacts are. And then produce some documentation that would allow us to communicate those values with other people in the state who might not be archaeologists, especially, decision makers, elected officials, the sorts of folks who have an impact on the work that we do and who make decisions about funding and other resources that go into it, but who might not fully understand all it is that we do and everything, all the value that it brings. Thanks. So as I said, this really is the efforts of our office, Clarion Associates, and Crow Canyon. And this came about because there is actually a whole nother set of reports called Preservation for a Changing Colorado. And Preservation for a Changing Colorado has come out every 5 years for the last 20 years and is really kind of focused on brick and mortar historic preservation and does a really good job of addressing some of the questions about the economic and jobs benefits that historic preservation brings to Colorado. Back in about 2016, when the last version of that report came out, I realized there was really kind of a glaring gap that archaeology wasn't addressed in that. So instead of trying to insert archaeology into that, we decided to do our own report. So when I talk about the reports today, I'll primarily be talking about the popular report, but there's actually two reports. There's a popular report and there's a technical report. And the technical report, I think, is really important for folks like us, professionals, to really understand the data and how we came about the data and how those numbers were crunched. And I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of today's talk. But really, it's to give us all an understanding, not only of the data that we have, but really of the data gaps that we don't have and how we might remedy those for the future as a community. All right. So as I said, I don't want to take credit for this. I really want to give so much credit to Clarion and Crow Canyon for all the work that they did. And I think I might be slightly off. So let me jump to my next talking point. So kind of the basis of the popular report is really highlighting how archaeology in Colorado is incredibly diverse, both in all the ways that it's practiced and interpreted, and then also the ways in which citizens and lay people experience archaeology. So professionals and enthusiasts are able to engage with archaeological sites in rural and small town Colorado, at museums, at different historic sites, as well as in urban areas of Colorado. And the reports provide a lot of different examples and case studies of these places. So it was really important to us to highlight the range of archaeological sites, everything from kind of pueblos to mining districts, and to show the importance of all those different types of sites across the state and how geographically diverse we are. Archaeology in Colorado also has a really large economic impact. And I think this is something that as professionals, we don't always have a good way to express, right? So we often talk about those intangible benefits of archaeology and of history and understanding our past and, multicultural understandings. But those sorts of arguments don't necessarily always make the impact on the sort of people that we need to make an impact on. So a lot of this report was really focused on looking at the economics of archaeology and the benefits that we bring to this state. And we actually see a huge economic impact from archaeology, especially when we start looking at things like the heritage tourism industry, which apparently is a $10.5 billion industry in this state. And it's really grown significantly. I think the previous data we had was from 2016. And just 3 years previously, it was a $6 billion industry. And we just keep seeing it go up and up and up. We don't have any more current numbers than that. And I'd be interested to see how the pandemic has affected it. Although I think, especially those of you in rural communities, just seeing all the different sorts of people who roll in, it continues to be a really big economic boon for our state. Another important aspect about heritage tourists is that they tend to have more money, they spend longer in a destination, and they're better educated than other categories of tourists. And so people who study these sorts of things and measure these sorts of things really see heritage tourists as having a really positive impact to local communities. In addition to those things, we see a lot of money and jobs related to cultural resource management. So archaeology companies, grant funding for research and education projects, conferences and events, which I'll also touch on a little bit later, and then all the cultural resource management that occurs on public lands. So the popular report is organized into 4 different sections, and I'll be touching on each of those briefly today. So the first one, what is archaeology? And this was really our opportunity to educate non-specialists, and again, those elected officials and other folks who might not have a good understanding of archaeology or don't have an understanding past popular culture about who are archaeologists, what it is archaeologists do. And so, we really try to highlight the full range of activities and specialisms that people engage in. We also really try to humanize archaeology. And so we include some brief bios on a couple of archaeologists. And I'm going to highlight this one of Dr. Jason LaBelle. And some of you probably know him. I know at least one of you worked with him. And I won't go really in depth into his career, but he is a professor at CSU. His specialty is Ice Age archaeology, but really, Dr. LaBelle is really involved in all kinds of archaeology here in Colorado. So one of the things, like I said, I'll try not to go too much in depth, and I want to save our time a little bit in case you guys want to ask questions at the end. But one of the things that we were interested in with these bios is also linking it back to community work that they're doing. So in this instance, one of the recent projects that Jason has been working on is at the Lindenmeyer site. And the Lindenmeyer site is in Fort Collins. It's owned by the city. And so what we're able to do is really kind of highlight the importance of partnerships between CSU, the city of Fort Collins, and Larimer County to protect the site. So in the report, we have this wonderful professional archaeologist commending the efforts of the city in designing a sensitive recreational space where, trails avoid the archaeological deposits, parking lots are hidden so visitors can experience an undeveloped landscape. And Jason really spoke to us about the consultation that the Fort Collins Museum of Discovery did with tribal partners, such as the Northern Cheyenne, the Northern Arapaho, the Southern Ute, and the Ute Mountain Ute. So again, we can kind of use this report and highlight these kinds of partnerships and activities to create examples for, our local municipalities and to educate local governments on what a successful archaeology preservation program could look like. And Lindenmeyer is also a great example of a site that can be really used holistically. So not just for, cultural and historical education purposes, but we can also talk about the natural environment and how that's integral to conservation of our historic resources. The next section is Archaeology Today. And this gets a little bit more in depth into the different sorts of funding that are generated and used across the state and the impacts that that has on local communities and local projects. It also discusses more in depth who kind of the wider archaeology community is. So moving away from these bios to talking about us as different sorts of groups of practitioners. So as many of you are aware, most efforts to find, study, and safeguard our cultural resources really requires a patchwork of funding resources and a really diverse team of subject matter experts. So this section explores the major economic drivers of the archaeology industry and estimates the potential economic influence of each of these key factors. A major funding source for historic properties around the state is the State Historical SHF. And I will say also that SHF funded this particular study. So we kind of see SHF everywhere. It's really involved in so many of our different projects. What I think is really interesting, and we also talk about this in the Preservation for a Change in Colorado report, is that for every $1 million spent in SHF grants, we get over $2 million in benefit to the Colorado economy. And so that's a much larger impact than even larger outside grants can have overall. And this really also includes an impact on local jobs and infusion into the local economies, not just a state economy. So likewise, federal and private grants that are given for archaeological projects in Colorado have this kind of additive impact on local economies. And we do go into that a little bit more in the report. We also talk about what is generated from visiting archaeological sites. And this really focused on the benefits. So we don't get into any of the kind of cost benefit issues of what it means to have increased visitation to some of our sites. And I know especially over the last year, for some of the federal partners that we work for, that has become increasingly a topic of conversation. So we can have, increased visitation, which increases, monetary things sometimes, but then that increased visitation can also have some bad impacts that we don't want on our sites. So we didn't have an opportunity to really get into that in this report, and it might be something that we think about for future reports about how we really balance this kind of management. But as I said earlier, heritage tourists really do tend to spend more time and money while traveling. And this has an important impact on our state economy. So in 2016, Colorado saw 5.6 million overnight tourists that specifically included museum visits as part of their itineraries. 7.1 million overnight tourists who visited historic sites, and nearly 9 million who visited state and national parks. This activity statewide supports 79,000 jobs, according to the State Tourism Office. So that's everything from, our jobs in museums or heritage tourism to jobs at the local hotel where these overnight visitors are staying or local restaurants. For this, we were actually able to collect data on 329 local museums across the state and historic sites. Museums in Colorado alone support over 16,000 jobs, and 8,000 of those are direct museum jobs. So we're a really large, and I'm saying that really broadly, but museums are a really large job creator and powerhouse. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily see. It's not as visible as other industries, but I think it's a really important thing for us to talk about and for us to communicate outside of ourselves and our own industry when we're trying to seek support from folks. That same study by the American Alliance of Museums found that museums in Colorado have an economic output that is 1.2 times greater than the national average. So whatever it is you guys are doing, keep it up, because you're doing a great job in really helping to keep Colorado economically viable. Like I said, many of these jobs are really directly within kind of our own archaeological and museum community. So this study, our report, coming back to this, really tried to drill down and identify all the different groups of people who are participants in these archaeological practices. So this includes educational institutions, and we have over 24 institutions that confer archaeology degrees in the state. Organizations such as the Colorado Archaeological Society, and we've separated them out from other avocational archaeology groups who are equally important, but CAS is so large that it actually generates a lot of its own economic impacts just by itself. It also keeps data separately from other organizations. And so we're able to see those impacts from CAS that maybe we're not able to see from other groups. CAS alone in 2017 contributed $481,000 worth of volunteer hours to projects across the state, which I think is really incredible. I also think that that number is really telling about how much value, not just intangible value, but other sorts of values that our volunteers bring. And so I think it's really important to recognize our volunteers and our volunteer base and continue to support them in all of our different activities. Another important aspect of the archaeology committee are our conferences and events. So in this section, we discuss everything from International Archaeology Day that's hosted by Roxborough State Park to all of the kind of state, regional, and nationwide conferences that are held throughout Colorado every year. So we have a small list of them here. In some of these conferences, like Colorado Council of Professional Archaeologists, CCPA, we hold conferences every single year. Other regional groups like the Colorado Wyoming Association of Museums, often hold their events here, again, sometimes in Wyoming. And then we'll have national groups that come in. And all of these have not only a positive economic benefit from renting venues, catering, that kind of thing, but all of the money that the participants in those conferences will also bring in. All right, so back to our case studies. Like Jason and Lindenmeyer, we also looked at Bonnie Clark and her work at Granada, commonly known as Campomache in Prowers County. And I'm really impressed by all the various aspects of this project that we were able to highlight that really touch on both the intangible and tangible benefits of the work that we do in this state. So most of you are probably familiar with this site, but it's a World War II Japanese internment camp. And it's where the US government incarcerated over 10,000 American citizens during World War II. It's a really incredible, it's powerful and evocative. And part of that is because it's so close to us in time. So Bonnie is able to work with the descendant community, some of whom had parents who were imprisoned here or who were themselves as small children imprisoned there. But Bonnie's work is also an amazing example of what we do today as archaeologists for how she incorporates relationship building with local communities into her fieldwork. So in terms of the creation of this report, most of the data was collected by the beginning of 2020. So this project operated for 6 field seasons between 2008 and 2018. The 2020 field season last year was postponed because of COVID. They did return to the field this year, but we don't have any numbers on what that looked like. But typically, Bonnie's project operates with an annual budget of about $50,000. And it's funded from a variety of places: National Park Service, Dumbarton Oaks Research Library, the University of Denver, the Japanese American Association of Colorado, field school tuitions, SHF, and private donations. So Dr. Clark uses most of those funds for the cash match required by SHF. And I think people find that they can mix and match these grants in a variety of ways to meet all the different cash match requirements that are found from different organizations. Then she gets crew members from a number of different places as well. So from DU, Prowers County, and again, multiple Japanese American community organizations and descendant groups. But then in Dr. Clark's own words, you know, she says, think about where your money goes, and that's how you create relationships. We could buy our equipment and supplies and contract services in Lamar, the nearest large town. It would probably be the least expensive way to go. However, we want to partner with the members of the community, and we want those relationships to be constructive and strong. So instead, we make our highest priority spending our money in Granada and at nearby locally owned businesses. As a rough estimate, we moved about $14,000 of project money into the local economy during our 2018 field season. The 25 staff, students, and volunteers also spent money at local shops during their stay, as did over 100 people who attended our 2 open house days. We work with all these people throughout the field season, and the number and cross-cutting nature of the relationships strengthens the project socially, economically, and intellectually, end quote. So in addition, this project really makes substantial contributions to the community identities of Granada and Prowers County, you know, through its partnership with the Amache Preservation Society Museum. So it's really just a huge success story. Some of you may also be aware that, you know, we are anticipating that this site will hopefully soon become a new National Park Service unit, which again, I think speaks to the real strength of the work that Dr. Clark has done out here during the years and the community support that is behind this project that may not have been there, you know, 15 or 20 years ago. Our next section is Archaeology Tomorrow, and this looks at some of the trends and impacts that may be heading our way in coming years. This includes talking about climate change, or at least touching on climate change, the effects of urban sprawl, especially as we get more and more people moving to places like the Front Range, the impacts of oil and gas development, which can be difficult to measure considering so much of it occurs on private lands, and then the potential benefits of land conservation. Again, we didn't get into some of the tensions between land conservation, recreation, and historic preservation and archaeology stewardship. But that's something that I think we should really investigate in the future. Climate change is something that I think is really salient, especially today when it's 71 degrees in Denver, Colorado on December 2nd. As nice as the weather is, that's a little bit unsettling. We highlighted very much the Mesa Verde wildfires from the late 90s because we were able to really point to direct impacts on historic preservation sites, as well as on visitation and other measures of people going to Mesa Verde. But we were actually kind of finalizing a lot of the data collection for this and a lot of the analysis at the tail end of 2 of the largest wildfires Colorado has ever seen, the East Troublesome and the Cameron Peak last fall. And I struggled with climate change and how we deal with it as archaeologists myself. I don't think it's always adequate for us just to talk about how people in the past adapted, although that is an important aspect. You know, we can talk about ancestral Puebloans and climate change on what is now the Western Slope and how they adapted and, you know, left the region and how we see things archaeologically. We also see that archaeologically, historically with Dust Bowl era communities. But at the same time, we were kind of finalizing all of this and doing the analysis and doing the write-up. I was really fortunate to attend Society for Historical Archaeology conference in 21, last January, and speak with Dr. Marcy Rockman about some of her ideas about climate change. So Marcy was the climate change archaeologist for the National Park Service until the Trump administration. But she's just absolutely phenomenal. And she really talks about how climate change has its own history and that how we can see that in industrial archaeological sites and throughout the industrial age. And so we have multiple entrees into this issue and into the relevance of it. And I think Colorado is a really unique place to illustrate that. So we touch on that a bit. And again, that's something that I'd really like us to have more conversations about throughout the community, as well as kind of try to delve deeper into in future iterations of the report. One of the other foci or focuses of this report is to offer potential tools and solutions to the challenges of conducting research, preserving sites, and kind of achieving the larger goals that we have in archaeology. So we have other case studies like this one on the Haney site that revolve around conservation work that organizations such as the Archaeological Conservancy do. And so in this case, we talk about how tools like conservation easements, which actually aren't widely used in archaeology, but people are really starting to take a longer look at, can help kind of fill some of the legal gaps and protections of important sites on private property. So the Haney site, for those of you who might not know, is a Chaco outlier in Montezuma County that for many years was under private ownership. The owners kind of bulldozed and potted huge portions of the site to sell the antiquities. Just a few years ago, the property went up for sale, and this allowed Crow Canyon and History Colorado and the Archaeological Conservancy to work together to both study and acquire the property for protection. So again, conservation can be tied back to all of these different economic benefits for a local community, while also discussing like the intangible reasons that we want to share these sites with future generations. And we've got this lovely quote from Jim Walker, who's the Southwest Regional Director for the Archaeological Conservancy. The preservation of landscapes and archaeological sites not only enriches minds, but it also can enrich communities through heritage and archaeological tourism, which is a major contributor to Colorado's economy. We need to protect these precious pieces of the past so we can pass them on to future generations. So, oh, I apologize, you guys. Here we go. Moving forward. I did not intend to talk about the Shavano site today. And I think we might be moving out or running out of a little bit of time to do so. But moving forward, like I said, we're hoping that this report, like the Preservation for a Changing Colorado study, is updated regularly, every few years, whether that's 5 years or on some other schedule, so that we can really get a good understanding and communicate the benefits of archaeology to the state. And this is kind of where I talk about some of our weaknesses. So Clarion really hunted down every potential data source and they mined it for information on archaeology. And so all those numbers that I shared earlier in the report regarding economic impacts that we have on the state are really impressive, but I think they're also really conservative. Our collective work has cultural, historical, and economic impacts to our state. But because this hasn't really been done before, we had to be really creative. And Clarion especially had to take a crash course in what archaeology was to figure out where all the data might live and what that might look like. So we had some real moments of frustration as well. We have a lot of data gaps, and the technical report goes into that a little bit more and identifies where practitioners can start to keep data for future iterations of this report, as well as data that we know existed that we couldn't get access to. So different funding agencies wouldn't share their numbers with us. Other agencies who had similar reports or other organizations weren't forthcoming for another of reasons in sharing their information and reports. So what we're hoping is as this kind of gains traction and people understand what we're trying to do with this report, that they're more willing to share with us in the future. So to that end, we have this entire section devoted to actions that individuals and organizations can take and recommendations for further studies, information about different sorts of resources, grants, funding, potential collaborators, all this different information that hopefully we can all use to strengthen our own work. And again, you know, really important to us as keepers of this report is information that we are, you know, really requesting our partners, kind of begging our partners to help collect for the next time we do this. So for instance, you know, grant funding. If you receive grants, you have baseline information about that information that you can keep track of and share with us in the future. Museums are a really vital part of the story. And museums were incredibly forthcoming, and I'm super grateful for that. So thank you all. You know, if you were asked for information and you shared, I'm deeply appreciative of that. And if you can continue sharing that information, numbers of visitors, costs of admission, your volunteers, different sorts of programming, all of that information will help us build better and better data to communicate to folks outside of our industry in the future. We're also collecting information on how you find this report useful, how you use it, and what you might want to see in the future. So we are taking recommendations on different topics that we could look at. The Preservation for a Changing Colorado report is so well established that we're able to do kind of thematic looks at issues instead of just doing really kind of broad-based sorts of stuff like we did here. So we could do that kind of thing in the future. You know, if climate change is, for instance, really becomes this huge issue for us collectively as a community, you know, how can we delve into that specifically? Or how can we delve in, you know, just to volunteers, or, you know, what other sorts of things are you all interested in? So wrapping it up, both of these reports, the popular and the technical, are available at archaeologybenefitscolorado.com. I still don't know if you can see, we do have hard copies. And Todd has provided me with mailing information for everybody who's involved in our museum network. And so we're going to be mailing hard copies out to folks as well. And we're soliciting feedback on the website too. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who has helped with this report. And if you guys have any questions, I look forward to chatting with you over the next few minutes.
If anybody's, if you're too shy and want to just put something in the chat, that's okay too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. That's fine. I'm used to talking into a void after 2 years. All right, well, if there's no questions, I know I threw a ton of info at you guys pretty fast. Yes, ma'am, Sarah.
Well, thank you for giving that presentation. It's always good to see like the numbers on everything, kind of like tangible achievements. Stuff. It's cool.
Thanks. And yeah, I think that we should all be really proud of ourselves. Like, we do a lot of work in this state, a lot, and we have a lot of really good impact. So if nothing else comes of it, then, you know, us being able to collectively pat ourselves on the back, I think that's a win. Yeah. All right.
Thank you again, Dr. Norton, for all of that and spearheading that effort. It took a while to put together, and like she said, if we can continue to kind of monitor and get more data, this particular study is going to just improve. So keep that in mind. And I know that we've done for the built environment, how many years have we done an economic study?
Yeah, 20 years.
Like
We're
20 years.
coming up on our
Yeah.
25th.
And
Yeah.
it's incredibly helpful to when we're advocating for the economic benefits of, landmarking and designating and going for, state historical fund grants to help support all of that.
Yeah.
And renovation and rehabilitation of those types of things. We can do the same for archaeology. And I think that's the point of it. So, again, if you can kind of keep numbers, that's going to be really helpful, and encourage you to use this as a tool in all of your local communities. So I will share this recording. Yes, I will post it on YouTube. So thank you. In case you didn't get it, or if you'd like to share it with somebody else. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's been useful. And I think as state agencies, we could definitely use this kind of information to argue from our FTEs and permanent FTEs. Yeah, so.
That's exactly what we are trying to do. Like, look, the data.
Yeah. Well, and two, one of the things that's been great about Clarion and Matt is, this was grant funded, and that grant is over, but they have given us so much information. I've got, one pagers that are like executive summaries. They're happy to pull out data. So like if anybody ever needs help with interpretation or like pulling out specific aspects of it, let us know. And my office, Clarion, other folks, we will help with that kind of communication effort. So that's what we're here for, is hopefully to be like that technical tool to give you guys what you need to advocate for yourselves and for all of us.
Well, cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And I hope that we'll give you back another 9 minutes of your day, and really do appreciate it. And I hope you all have pleasant holidays coming up and a good new year, and we'll see you in 2022.
Yep.
So thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you. Nice.